dark in here, though.
You need a flashlight?
I don't have one of those. I need some new eyes. If those guys, have you got eyes there as well? You
Do
see
you
that
want
everything else?
the light from my cell phone? Here.
Yeah, that'd be nice, thank you. Yeah, I'll do that. It's just that I don't want to stumble too badly. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Welcome as we meet on Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation, and the lands of those First Nations who haven't taken treaty. And there are a number in our area. Thank you very much to the team at the back who were able to intervene so nicely. This production brought to you by Sebastian and David. I'd like to welcome Amanda here, who's been incredibly patient also as we get our systems going. So I now read, I'm not Leah Taylor and I'm not Marcus Miller, as you may have noticed. I'm standing in for them and I'm really pleased and quite happy to be able to do that today. Amanda is an Indigenous Michif filmmaker, media stop-motion artist, currently based in unceded Coast Salish territory, also known as Vancouver. She studied photography and illustration at Sheridan Institute and extended those media into creations in media arts. Amanda's work looks into Indigenous lineage, language, and unconventional methods of storytelling. And any of you who have been able to get out to Wanuskewin to see her exhibition, it's wonderful, it's phenomenal, and it's very, I was going to say captivating, I think. My word, I don't know. Each film is a collaborative process with a multi-layered approach to aspects of animation in the sonic spectrum. Her films have screened across the globe, most notably at Cannes, TIFF, VIFF, and Ottawa International Animation Festival. Amanda has received grants from the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, BC Council, and the National Film Board. In 2003, she was the recipient of the K.M. Hunter Artist Award for Film and Video. Most recently, she was selected by renowned filmmaker Lana Sabamsaman to receive $50,000 in post-services through the Clyde Gilmore Technicolor Award. And this talk today is a collaboration between the University Art Galleries and Wanuskewin Heritage Park, which is part of a larger partnership that we're working on. So it's with great pleasure, welcome Amanda, and ask you to welcome her.
Thank you to the university and to Felicia and Wanuskewin for bringing me out here in Treaty 6 territory. My name is Amanda Strong, also known as Spotted Fawn, and I'm of Michif or Métis descent through my grandmother's lineage, and my other grandparents were Scottish, Polish, and Irish, so a big mix of things. But because I didn't grow up with sort of the lineage of my other grandparents, I was closest to my maternal grandmother, who just recently passed, but really helped instill in me sort of what feels right and sort of my Indigenous roots, and that's sort of been sort of the core of who I've been as a person and artist for a long time now. So I was originally born in Brampton, Ontario, and kind of grew up around the Toronto area till about I was 20, and have sort of moved around Canada, exploring my practice and just learning. And so I was in Montreal for a bit and have been in unceded Coast Salish territories in Vancouver for about just around 5 years now. So I was primarily athletic in terms of mindset and what I wanted to do with my life up until about 20, where I thought I was going to be a scientist or a kinesiologist, something like that. And then my grandfather passed away, who had a lot of old analog cameras, a lot of film, medium format things, and when he passed, I was able to sort of collect those items, and it sort of just sparked something within me. And I've always been a very emotional person, had trouble dealing with my feelings or just internalized a lot, and so I formed this relationship with the lens, and primarily behind the camera at the time, and just really fell in love with film, with And then eventually, obviously with digital technology emerging, moved more into like a digital platform. However, I was very fortunate to have analog training. So I went to Sheridan College in Ontario, or Sheridan Institute is what it's now called, and was the last year to study in their photography program that was a hybrid of the analog film and digital. So after that year, the analog film was being completely removed. So I feel very lucky to have sort of been at the tail end of that, where I got to learn large format, medium format, a lot of darkroom stuff. I actually had my own darkroom for a while in a basement, and just, yeah, really loved that process. I also started to focus on self-portraiture for a while, where I would, I guess, create characters of myself in front of the camera. So there was this interesting thing about being behind and in front of the camera. And then I sort of decided that I didn't want to be a photographer, or it wasn't necessarily the end game of what I wanted to do. So I continued my education at Sheridan and took a degree program in illustration, interpretive illustration. And I will add that I got rejected from the film program at that time. So I got accepted into illustration and rejected from film, and I was like, okay. So I did my 4 years there, and sort of, again, decided I didn't really want to be an illustrator, but I loved the principles. I got to learn a lot more, like sort of fine art, handmade, tactic-based things, and kind of started to make a lot of these collage journal worlds. That I also was taking the principles of what I did in photography as well. So a lot of my illustration work encompassed some of that sort of photography base, mixed with sort of drawing or different types of collage stuff. And sort of as I came to the end of that program, I realized again, okay, I don't want to be a photographer, I don't want to be an illustrator. I really love all the skills that I've built, but it's not enough. So what was missing? What was missing was that these were all still-based practices where everything was encapsulated into one image, or maybe a series of a couple. And it made me realize that I sort of wanted to keep creating these worlds, but didn't want to be limited by that 1 or 3 images or whatever it would be. And why not extend that into what's still images, but moving image? So I think even in, like sort of halfway through my studies, I realized I wanted to sort of take the basis of these, and that those practices are still embedded in what I do today, but that I wanted to kind of push it into this idea of moving image or animation or film. So I started, I think in year 3, just making animations and validating them as illustration, because I'd be like, well, they're 24 stills per second or whatever it is. So I would challenge their convention of like, what is a illustration? I'm like, well, it's just many illustrations if you break it down into frames or whatever. So I got in a lot of trouble, and then a lot more people just started doing media in illustration, which they didn't like. And it's funny because by the time I graduated, I made my first film, which I will never show you because it's really embarrassing. Maybe I'll show you some stills or something. But the film department there came to me and said, you should apply for our film program. This is great work. Like, this is like award-winning work. And I just sat there and said, well, you know what? Actually, I did 4 years ago. And I think I'm good, but thank you. So it was really nice because you could tell, I think they were like, we need women in our program. Like, it was like, I knew they wanted to fulfill and tick off boxes. And by that time, I had just decided that I was grateful for education, but was on a different path of working more with mentors and sort of learning with people outside of the education system. So that's just a bit about sort of my past and sort of how I got to where I am today. So sort of what I'm doing today is primarily stop motion based animation. And why I love it so dearly is that, again, it encompasses all of the things that I learned in the past, and it applies all these practical skill sets, and it's sort of all in one thing. And sort of just as we go back to how we got this presentation to even work today, film or animation to me is essentially like a community or a family. And it's essentially, problems happen all the time where it's literally exactly that, where someone could be like, I have a computer, let's fix it. And it's awesome. It's sort of a community-based thing to make it happen. And so that's another reason why I really love it. I love collaborating. I love working with people, sharing knowledge, teaching. And again, I also learn from everybody that I work with. So stop motion animation, I think you have to be insane to want to do it on a daily basis, but that's what I do, and I am insane, so it's great. And it's a very, very, very time-consuming based process, because you're essentially spending a lot of time to make everything, and then you have to animate it literally frame by frame. So I'm gonna maybe show you guys a little demo reel of my studio or my work. So I also have started my own sort of studio in Vancouver called Spotted Fawn Productions. So it's like solely run, and it's primarily there to support sort of minority in film and animation. So to me, that's women, LGBTQ community, Indigenous people, people of color, to sort of really help train and build like a community on an independent level where it's not about corporate or commercial work, where we're at the forefront, we're telling our own stories, we're not dictated by other people or, you know, sort of the dominant culture that is known as sort of in film and animation. So it's really important to me to create new spaces for different voices to tell our own stories. So that's I'll tell you a bit more about the studio and sort of where we're at now in a moment. So this is a demo reel. It doesn't include our latest film, which I'm going to share a bit more with you guys as well today. So this is sort of works up until from about 2013 to 16. I apologize, the sound isn't super loud, but hopefully you still get it. So that's just a little snippet into some of the projects. So that's that encapsulates about like 4 to 5 years full time of work. I don't want this one. Yeah, so that's I think about 4 or 5 different projects. So as you can tell, there's like a lot of handmade elements. Even though we're using digital technology, so a lot of the cameras that we're using are like literally just digital SLRs. It's to me about the handmade and the practical sort of, again, analog material. And so, although we do compositing and different elements to sort of piece it all together with digital technology, to me those are just tools that are an extension of sort of the material that we make. So I wanted to show some of the films, but the speakers aren't the greatest. So I wanted to just ask how you guys felt of, like, the sound. I wanted to explain the sound is super important to me too. Like, sound is another thing that I spend like almost as much thought and time into as I do the picture, because all of the projects I do, I try to create original music and score, and I view it like very layered as I would picture. So it's definitely hard for me to watch them when you don't really hear the sound. So I don't know whether you guys would want to still see a few of the films, or if not, I can keep talking. It's probably more interesting to watch the films though.
Watch the films.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so you'll just have to bear with. Do you guys have any speakers or like anything other than just the projector?
The speaker
Oh, okay.
wearing clothes.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so have any of you seen the Wanuskewin show? So you would have seen a few of those films. So what I might do is show one of my first films that I did, just so it's hopefully something different for you guys. Have you seen Indigo? Okay. All right, I'm going to show Indigo, which was my first stop motion film, and I can talk about it a little bit and describe what it's like to make these. And please note, I really love sharing or talking, so if anyone has any questions about process or anything you see at any point, I really love having discussion, so please feel free to ask me anything at any point. Okay, so this film is Indigo. I think we completed it, I think it screened 2014, so I'll just maybe tell you a little bit about it. So I had just finished school and was really interested in the idea of stop motion, and had done a few films before this, but were more sort of, they weren't sort of used in this way, or like a full-on execution of puppets. I'd never had any funding. So I applied for Canada Council for the Arts and Ontario Arts Council, I believe, for this one. And also got my first filmmaking assistance grant from the National Film Board. So this was the first time that I had like a bit of money and the ability to work with a bigger team and sort of expand into new territories of learning what this medium was, again, and learning about what collaboration team building is. So this piece to me was about, it was sort of a very personal storyline of, I guess, feeling like a very emotional, creative person who feels suppressed by, as we age, we're sort of expected to form into boxes and conformity and the way society is. So this idea of imagination versus logic, and a lot of ideas of dualism, and is also my own struggle with my identity and being mixed blood, and what does that mean? What am I entitled to as still learning a lot, and never wanted to be the person to kind of go into pan-Indian sort of imagery or stereotypes where you're kind of just doing something just because. Like, if I ever commit to a story, I want to make sure it's coming from the right place, and that I feel good about it, and that it has good intention. So this part of this is also about my own, I guess, fear of really coming into my identity and who I was, and just, so there's hidden elements of that. So again, I'll let you watch it, and then I can tell you a bit more about it once you've seen it. I don't know whether anyone wants to move closer, because there's a lot of chairs up here, and the sound again is pretty quiet, so it's up to you, but feel free to move up. But this is Indigo. Does anybody have any? Yeah, that was my first stop motion. It was quite the journey. Does anybody have any specific questions about any of that after sort of seeing?
Did this come after Sheridan?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you often do the pairing of the video with the actual pieces like in the show, like the actual figures and such? Is that how you show them generally?
Oh, no, this is one of the first time, well, not the first time, but we were able to do a show at Grunt Gallery in Vancouver about 2 years ago, and that sort of helped start the idea of having all of the labor and the pieces and the puppets and the sets that are such a different experience when you see them in person versus the film itself. And this was at Wanuskewin is definitely the biggest show where I think you almost have all of my everything that we've made. Our studio feels very empty right now. And we have a lot of visitors that come by, and it's hard lately because we're like, yeah, everything is not here, so we can't show you anything. But no, it's really exciting for me. It's actually something I've always wanted to do, but you can't just do that right off the bat. You have to build your way up and get to a place where that's where when I first tried to explain it to people, it's a tough one to sell when we don't have an example of it, or you don't have any photos of like what it would look like, and people don't always know what all this stuff is or how big it is. Like there's so many factors to whether people would want to take that on or not. It's pretty ambitious too, as you can ask Felicia over here doing our install and just getting everything out here. It's massive. How many crates did we have? Two really big ones.
Jam-packed.
Jam-packed, yeah.
Yeah, last, I guess, like just the figures.
Yeah.
Because they're just so...
Yeah, I wish I had like one in person, but I guess a lot of you have seen them, so that's great. But yeah, I'd like to push that more and actually start, because I didn't necessarily have the shows in mind when making the films. I knew I'd want to like do something and to sort of extrapolate beyond the screen, sort of while making them. But I'm actually trying to plan productions now where it's actually like before the film is made, the exhibition or the physical space that they would exist in is a much bigger thought out process even before making the film, and how much further can we go with it, or how to even design like bigger shows around the content and how to like create definitely. So lots to think about, but no, this was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and it was sort of a question of, do I continue this? Because that took 2 years to make 8 minutes and almost full time with, I think, about sort of between 5 to 8 of us at that time. And it's insane, like the things, especially when you haven't done it before, like the learning curve. And even now the learning curve is every project, because every project is its own thing. It's got its own set of variables and challenges, and none of them are the same. So even if you've made one, it doesn't mean your next one is going to be easier, like happen faster. It just means it's a whole new set of things to make and things to animate and things to bring to life. And I'm always trying to push or try new things in each production, which definitely doesn't make it easier for myself or the team. So, but no, this one was instrumental in it, and it sort of was my breaking point of, is this what I want to do? And as insane and crazy and difficult as it was to get through that film and actually see it through to the end, I sort of made a choice to commit, and I decided how much I love it. And just, again, it's like a tight-knit community. Not anyone will just commit to like helping on something like this or wanting to be a part of this process. So the people who do are often like really passionate about it, and they're there for the right reasons, the same reasons that I would be. So that is super exciting to me, again, to be collaborating with people like-minded, or that just sort of like help flourish creativity and like just go into all these worlds of creation. So it's really exciting.
So that stylistically, it puts me in a little bit in mind of Jan Svankmajer or perhaps the Brothers Quay, but my own vocabulary is fairly limited. I wonder if you could speak to stylistic influence for this project, maybe in terms of your approach.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at sort of my older stuff, or even a lot of my photography, it's always had a darker sort of aesthetic. I mean, one of my favorite photographers slash videographers now would be Florio Sigismondi, who's like an Italian-based, originally photographer, like did a lot of the Marilyn Manson videos in the 90s. Very dark aesthetic, making a lot more film-based stuff now. But she was a huge influence when I was younger, that sort of really like helped me in terms of how I was expressing myself. But I just naturally have a darker sort of aesthetic or taste, or really textural, really gritty. I wasn't too familiar with the Brothers Quay, like a lot of people bring that up, and I love their work now that I watch it, and definitely see like palette similarities and whatnot, but I wouldn't say I was like studying them per se. And yeah, I think it just like a combination of like lighting, or just like having sort of art direction in mind. But
Well, and it's interesting that that happens independently, because then it speaks maybe to a zeitgeist of sorts.
yeah, definitely. So it's very exciting for me again, because it's like applying all the things that I went to school for. Like it's heavily based in photography, lighting principles, but you're also making things by hand and whatnot. So that's why I love it, and the sound is really exciting too. I'm not a sound artist, so that's one thing I don't do, or not like super involved in like practically in terms of composing, but I work with composers and sort of have a lot of ideas. I'm just not a sound artist, so that's the area that I don't have like practical experience, but get still as excited by and kind of really enjoy that process as well. So it's a lot of fun to sort of merge sonic and visual worlds together.
So you mentioned the NFB had provided some of your
Yeah,
funding
so
for the
that's
project,
actually a
but I
really
wonder
interesting point.
if you, because they like usually they don't fund anything they don't
Produce
and then own afterwards. Is that
yeah,
the case?
I can speak to that a bit.
Because I'm also curious about how.
So they do
Authors' rights and that.
filmmakers assistance grants, and they're not very much. Like typically they're like a few thousand or something like that. But there's an animation department in Montreal that I sort of figured out you don't, because usually it's regionalized, so you would apply based on where you're located in Canada, so whether that's Eastern or Pacific centers. But they have the animation head is in Montreal, and they had an animation specific one that's not as advertised. And there's a bit more you could apply for. So with this, for instance, we were able to do like color correct and proper sound. We did Foley, sound mix, and I'd never done those things before in a like professional space. So that was instrumental in, unfortunately, again, you can't hear the quality of the sound, but that was like a huge step of me learning and having access to a facility like that, because it usually, when you do it on your own, it's not going to be quite like that. Even the color correct and whatnot, it won't look as good as when you get sort of post services. So there's filmmakers assistance grants that aren't based on them being a producer. They won't have any say or creative input. It's literally just there to help you give some sort of, like for emerging filmmakers, to give sort of top up funds to kind of get through post production.
But they're not undertaking your rights after too?
No, not at all.
Because that's like the only instance I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, and it's actually right now, I'm working on my next production where I am building a co-production with them to do my first film with them beyond the Filmmakers Assistance Program, where I've set it up that I'm a co-producer, but majority co-producer, because I've heard those horror stories of people being fully produced by the film board or any sort of organization like that, where they own everything. And like now that I've done all these works and sort of had Arts Council funding, they're sort of like my children. I don't have real children, unfortunately, but I have my films. And it takes longer to conceive them, and it's very hard to push them out and have them go out into the world. It's terrifying. You have to watch them grow, and people judge them and all sorts of things, just like real children. So it's like, now that I've had independent films, it will be very hard for me to have somebody come in and try to say, we're going to own it, and if we fund it, it belongs to us, and we're going to tell you, and we're going to give feedback, and you're not going to be able to do that. Like, I'm like, no, not into that. So, I mean, if you want to hear about where I'm at now versus where I was in 2014, that might be a bit of an interesting story. Again, I don't know whether you'd want to see a film, or I can sort of share some more experience basing. It's sort of up to you guys. But what I'm trying to say is I'm working very hard to create, like, break conventional ways of how funders have worked with artists, and in particular Indigenous artists, because all of these organizations and funders right now are making these bold statements. We're going to support Indigenous filmmakers. We're going to support women directors. And it's great, but then they have a lot of work to do, and they have a lot of change to make, and that's like what I'm going and trying to hold them accountable for now. So in 2014, I barely could talk. I wouldn't even be like saying a word to you guys right now. I'd just be showing my films and hiding in a corner. Whereas I had to learn very hard and quick that if I wanted to continue making films, receiving funding, you actually have to do a lot of challenge to the way the systems are and fight for what you need. And especially in stop motion, I am constantly boxed into the typical short film category that live action is based in. And you can make a live action short in 2 weeks. So when I have to spend 2 years to make a film, it's very difficult to be put in that box. And so I've received funding from people like CBC now, TELUS, and it's like I have to fight so hard. And I am known by all of them as very difficult. But I don't care, because at the end of the day, I will get my way, and they're not going to tell me how to tell my stories. And I will say that right to them, and they'll still fund me. And I learned very quickly that there's people there who will say no to you right off the bat. And most people, maybe 95% of people, will be like, okay, no problem. They'll walk away, or they'll do what they're asked. And then there's the other people where if you fight and you say, no, that's not acceptable, and no, we need to talk further about this, or no, like I need to challenge this in some way, there actually is room for that. And a lot of people don't know that. And if there's one thing I can share is that, and that I feel like I've been able to push through many points where people first said no to me. And now I'm able to sort of challenge those sort of ways. And that's one thing I'm doing with the film board right now is they typically own productions, whereas I'm saying, I want your support. I want to work with you guys. You guys will be amazing for distribution and support, but you will not own the majority of my film, or you will not dictate things the way you're used to. Yeah. Your contracts are colonial. And no, you can't, like, I have an Indigenous lawyer, and we're like challenging even the terminology in their contracts. And we can do that now. And if you're claiming to support and work and build relationships, then you have work to do to change the systems you had in place before. So I guess if that helps, that is typically what they're known for. But for 2 years, I've been like, I'm still in negotiation to set it up. So I could have rushed and started it like a year ago, yeah, but I would have been under their terms, and I won't do that.
Well, I know a lot of filmmakers who get, they're like find out from other people where their work has been screening from the NFB, and they're like, oh, I had a show in Europe. I didn't get invited, so they never knew, and they just got like a.
No, I don't.
You don't get royalties.
You don't become anything.
So
it's theirs. It's
they
all
can't
theirs.
access their stuff on Vimeo.
Yeah.
You know? They're like, no, I can't show that one unless you go to the.
I'll give you an example. So I just finished a film. It's actually 99% finished. It's premiering at TIFF. It's my new one called Biidaaban. And I wanted to show you guys a few bits from it. And I asked for funding for CBC while I was making it. And they were interested. They're like, oh, this looks beautiful. I'd already started it, so there was lots to show them. And they're like, oh, unfortunately, there's no box for it. Like, it's not a documentary. Oh, we'd love to help you, but like just all this stuff around. Suddenly they had no money. So I was like, okay, fine, no problem. I'm gonna make it anyways. I don't care if you don't support me. I just thought I would ask for help. So it gets into TIFF a couple weeks ago, and they literally came on board this week, and they want to get their credits in for TIFF. And I was just like, how do you suddenly have money? Where were you when I was making the damn thing? So it's funny how they change and like want to be a part of the success, or they don't want to take the risk, and then they view me as like challenging because they know I'm not going to say yes or like agree with everything they say. But then when I see it through, they want to hop on the. So it's a very weird system.
Yeah.
But and they tried to like, we want our CPC at the front end of the credits, and I was like, hell no. I was like, I just spent 2 years on this. You can have it at the end. Deal or no deal? They're like, fine. So it's like, they're like, no, that's a condition. We can't sign the contract if you don't like. I'm like, well, I'm not putting it at the beginning of my film, just so you know.
Yeah.
And then they still agreed. Like, they'll try to fight for what they want. All these places, even NFB. And so it's just a matter, like, for me, I'm very fortunate because now I've made a lot of my own independent films where nobody has told me how to tell those stories. So I have a bit of, I don't know what you want to call it, leeway where they know I can finish a film. They know I'm going to do it with or without their help. So I think it's like up to them to decide like how, and they know I'm not going to just be their yes man or whatever. So it's hard. Like, I just could never let somebody else own all of this when I have like 30 people who have like put their life and soul into this for years too. Like it like people have described who work with the NFB like kind of like someone stealing your baby, or like you give birth and then it's like gone and no longer belongs to you. And that's like a horrific feeling to have spent or like put everything into a piece, and then someone just gets to come in and swoop and own it, and you don't have any rights to it. So it's really interesting. It's an important dialogue, and I think we need to like really keep that dialogue going to create change and really make the people who sit in offices and cushy chairs and have benefited jobs and don't have to worry and have 6 weeks of vacation a year. Meanwhile, the artist is struggling, not having any days off, not making any money. The ones who's making the work, but don't get to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to keep challenging that. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do. Like, alongside making the work, it's also about creating new spaces and like new ways of working and kind of breaking some of these conventional systems that we know or that are known. And it's like, for me, being an Indigenous person, like those ways don't work. Like, none of it makes sense to me. It's so like their structures are like mind-boggling, and it's hard to like convey that like we have different ways of working or learning or process or sharing, and like it doesn't always fit into your contracts or boxes. So it's important to like challenge that for me.
It's funny because there's a Indigenous filmmaker here in Saskatchewan, Marjorie Bocage, who does a lot of documentary work.
Nice.
She's been working for years, and she's told me often the story of like working with Telefilm Canada in the 90s and using a collaborative framework in the storytelling structure of making a feature film. And they had like cast Johnny Depp in this film about Rougarou, and she like went out and met with him, and this is just after he shot Gilbert Grape, so it's like pretty famous. And Telefilm tried to change how they were going to structure the story to put him as a star, and she was like, no, in this storytelling in our culture, in her culture, there's nobody above the rest. It's an even horizontal plane run. And they wouldn't back down, so she canceled this like $1 million or really expensive production. So it's like, I think it's nice to hear that it's that you're continuing to challenge the things, but at the same time, it's like how much work is getting sort of plopped out, and it's like,
sometimes
well, this can't be.
you have to walk away. Exactly. Like, sometimes it's not worth it. Like, even if it's a ton of money. Like, I've turned so many things down that are like money-based gigs that just I have no interest in or don't feel right. And I 100% agree. Like, my whole model and philosophy with my own work and the collaboration of my studio is like, it's known, it's horizontal hierarchy. So nobody's above anybody, nobody gets to belittle anybody. We still have leaders but it's about sharing, learning curve, like the process of how we work is so different than the industry, and like I will stay true to that as long as I can, because it's not my intention to veer. So it's important, and yeah, sometimes, especially in the past, if you're like a moral person and and you're not going to sell out, yeah, you have to walk away from things, because back then it wouldn't have been that easy for an Indigenous filmmaker to like make a big thing like telefilm change, you know. So it's unfortunate to hear, but I'm glad to hear that they stuck to their moral compass. Even though
I think there's a lot of new structures that
yeah,
just working with other communities to develop.
Are we out of time?
No,
Oh,
well,
sorry.
we're out of time when you're out of time.
Okay.
Amanda,
I
this
can
is
talk.
great. We don't want to presume, but I know you were going to show another
Yeah.
piece of work, and we'd love to see that, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can show
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
the sort of new piece that, it's not, I don't have a final copy yet. So what I wanted to sort of show you a bit is I have two things. Like I have the work in progress is actually what's at Wanuskewin. So it's the caribou ghosts and untold stories, but that's not really the film at all. So I have like a festival cut, but it's hard too because it's not at all like the final. So we just went and did like final sound, final color at Technicolor in Toronto. So it's interesting because you mentioned the Technicolor award that Alan Sabamsawin presented me last January, and I finally got to use it just last week. So again, it was another 2-year journey, and this time we actually made 18 minutes, which is insane. An NFB stop motion production, like fully produced NFB, just came out, and it took them 5 years to make 8 minutes. And that was like a fully like funded production, and we somehow did 18 minutes in 2 years because I'm crazy. But yeah, this unfortunately I don't have a finished film. It will be finished on Tuesday, so you just missed. But I wonder. So the interesting thing would be is you could sort of see some like there's very rough. I could even just like talk you through some of it because again the sound is not the best. So in this film, so this is called Biidaaban the Dawn Comes, and Biidaaban, or that word, comes from the Anishinaabe. It's an Anishinaabe word, and it's a story that's sort of an amalgamation of Leanne Simpson's writings. I don't know if you guys know Leanne Simpson, phenomenal powerhouse. So she has 3 stories that we sort of amalgamated. One is Ghosts, Caribou, and Untold Stories. That's her voice there.
We are the best chained troops that refuse to fight.
I'll wait till she's done.
We are hyped up on aesthetics and tripped up by real life. We don't have time to feel these feelings, so we pile that for another day. We don't have to plan for the win. We always lose. Anyway, caribou ghosts and untold stories.
So yeah, we decided to put a poem in this one. So a lot of this is rough, so it's just sort of blocked in. So a lot of this film is shot in like, it's all practically built, like that's a house. That house took like 3 months to build just on its own. Can we actually turn the sound down or off just so I can just, or is it distracting for me to talk?
On the projector, there may be a volume.
Where?
On the projector itself,
Oh.
is there a volume?
I don't see it. Sorry. But yeah, so these puppets are at Wanuskewin right now, and they're probably the most intricate things we've ever made. This is sabe. So sabe is, I don't want to use the word Sasquatch because it's sort of a appropriated word from the West Coast nations, but sabe is like an Anishinaabe sort of man of before us, husband of the earth. He's 10,000 years old. So Leanne, this is coming from like Leanne's nation and her writings. And Biidaaban is a non-binary sort of main character, and we based Biidaaban off of our friend Wes, who is non-binary. And at the end of the production, we'll be giving them we made a duplicate doll of them, so like it's important to me to share, so we're going to gift Wes a doll of themselves, and Leanne will get one of Sabe, and so we're pretty excited to pass those along. So this is sort of a story of reclaiming ceremony in the present, and the idea of sort of development and what has that sort of done to the land, to animals, and that's sort of where the ghost caribou and ghost wolf come in, is they were here and they were keepers of the land as well. And so over time and with these neighborhood developments, it sort of either removed them or culled them out of the land, and then also the forest or the trees. So there's sort of these maple trees that are like sort of ancestral or have been around for a lot, like the old growth maple trees on these properties in neighborhoods. So it's like, who owns these trees? And the idea is that Biidaaban is sort of setting out to go and collect the sap, which is like a sort of time immemorial process or ceremony, but now it's like on these lands that are considered private, even though that would have once upon a time been the land of the ancestors or their land. And Leanne writes about the ghost caribou because the caribou used to be in southern Ontario or like southern Canada, and she writes about the idea of like still feeling their spirits and that they're still here, but it's like the ghost versions of them. And that's actually was the seed to this whole piece, and I just found that like to be so powerful and beautiful. So yeah, so these are all handmade houses.
What's the scale of those houses?
They're pretty big. They're about like this big. And then a lot of it was like sort of shot with green screen or sort of shot practically. So everything that is composited is like sort of handmade. There is a bit of 3D. So this is the first time that we tried using 3D and actually using 3D modeling in space to replicate things that we had made already by hand. So again, like we're using new technologies, but it's to keep the integrity of the actual handmade elements.
Is it wax, the heads and the hands?
No, it's silicone. So they can actually like move and
Oh,
again, a lot of this is very rough, so it's not. So that was all done practically, them jumping on the roofs. That took like, I think, 16 hours to shoot that. It's sort of the idea of like modernizing or creating us to be present. So a lot of times, like, we're painted in the past in some way as Indigenous people, and I think it's important that we represent ourselves in the present as well, but like still understand our connections and our ties and our ancestors of the past. So that's sort of the layers that I try to work in, is sort of being contemporary. And like it's great because Leanne writes about, the sort of sabe in a very modern sense, and they're like texting, and so I think that's so powerful. Here they're about to text. And there's like Anishinaabe on the texting device, which I think is badass, personally. But yeah, it's crazy how long all this stuff takes to make. Even just those buckets probably took a month. You can probably see that the puppet making has evolved quite a bit from the first one. Just sort of like learning the different people you work with, or learning about material. This one actually we didn't have any more budget because nobody wanted to help while I was working. But I just had a much more like a team who had more experience for this one. And really believed in the project. So you can see, like, often when you don't have like proper color correction, a lot of shots will feel like the color it's so hard to match without sort of having a color session. So that's what we were doing in Toronto, is sort of tying all the scenes together so it feels like they're all the same thing. Even sabe needs their rest.
Oops.
caribou ghosts and untold stories, bad timing, smashed hearts, chain tracks, six-pack, riff-raff, ending regret, a collection of old hearts. We get these little gifts of tremendous, uncarded by past dues. We get these tiny moments. There's never enough glue. We'll tie ourselves together with bungee cords, luck, really fish, the fire, ebony nights. Catharsis is so elusive. We'll save that for another day. Meet me at the underpass. Rebellion is on her way.
So there you get a sneak peek of the very, very rough, sorry.
That's why the rebellion is underway. That's why it's at risk.
What's that?
The note,
Yeah.
rebellion, like,
Rebellion.
Sure is at risk.
Totally.
Rebellion is underway.
That's fabulous. Just a couple of quick thank yous, Shamin, for setting everything up and no doubt having to put everything away when we're gone. The emergency IT team back, and Felicia and Wanuskewin for bringing Amanda here. I'd just like to thank you for your kindness in being here and sharing not only your work, which is, I said captivating earlier, that just is a kind of a placeholder for something I think much more important. But also for talking about your experience and in answer to questions about how to deal with institutional stubbornness and blindness and so on as an artist, as an Indigenous artist, and particularly in the area you work in, which is obviously so highly leveraged around financing and government financing. You know, I guess those of you who are able to get out to the park to see the exhibition appreciate some of what we've seen today. And those of you who don't, can they come visit you at Spotted Fawn in Vancouver?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally. All the time. I love that when people come.
So again, thank you very much. This was a wonderful way to spend a good deal of time. So for me, I mean, Indigo was